Hello and welcome to a Team Moray Robotics event recap. I competed at RABID on July 20th with my Antweight combat robot, Moray, and this was my first ever event that I competed at, excluding the Roombas. So how did it go? Well, you're looking at my robot before the event, and that's what it looks like now. Like all events, all robots have to go through a weigh-in and safety, and Moray was within weight and passed its fail-safe test easily. Before fight started, there was a builder's safety meeting where the load-in and load-out procedures were given to us, as well as some safety measures in the pits like weapon locks and battery safety. After the meeting, all the builders could see their first-round matchups because the brackets were posted. So there were two different classes at the event. There were the plastic Antweights, which are 1-pound robots made almost entirely with plastic, and then the full combat ants, which are 1-pound robots made with metal and whatever materials you want. So Moray is a full combat ant. If you haven't seen the other videos on Moray, especially the most recent one, you should go and watch those. If you want more information on what went on during the design and build process, but basically, I was very tight on weight and could only use my small titanium vertical spinner instead of my larger disc that I really wanted to run. And I didn't have any weight left for attachments like wedges, so I really didn't want to have to fight a horizontal spinner. My first opponent was a horizontal spinner. The robot I would be fighting in the first round was called Goal Line, which is the builder Nick's first Antweight. He usually competes with Lego combat robots and was actually running a Lego tournament at RABID in addition to fighting with Goal Line. Goal Line passed safety right before I did, so I saw that it was lightning fast. This was a nightmare matchup for Moray because I wasn't able to run anything on the front of my robot to deflect Goal Line's horizontal spinner, and I wasn't expecting to win this fight, but I hoped that I could at least survive a while and maybe get a few hits. When the fight starts, I don't box rush him because I don't want to make a mistake and jam a critical component into his spinner, and his spinner got up to speed pretty much instantly anyways, so a box rush really wouldn't have done much. I try to get to the side of Goal Line, but his spinner clips my right wheel. He immediately spins around and hits Moray hard on the right corner of the chassis, sending him flying across the arena and flipping Moray over. So now you can see that I already lost my right side drive after only 2 hits, so I was pretty much defenseless now, upside down, and Goal Line slowly comes in to finish Moray. I can only move in a circle now and end up turning into his weapon, which connects right in the middle of the wheel and locks it up, meaning that I had no way to move. He lands a small hit on my wheel and then positions the robot behind Moray in case it came back to life. But Moray was counted out and Goal Line took the win. So that was a pretty terrible first ever fight for Moray, but it was a fantastic first ever fight for Goal Line. Even though I got destroyed, I still really enjoyed it though. I took Moray back to the pits to assess the damage. So clearly the drive stopped working, and that was because he hit both wheel hubs and ruined the motors. He might have also connected directly with the motor shaft. One of the motors got its shaft bent a lot and the hub was damaged, so I couldn't really get it off. The other motor wasn't as bent, but it was definitely completely locked up. The top plate had a small chunk taken out of it, but nothing bad. Both wheels took damage, but neither were terrible. The backside also had a tiny scratch. But there was one bit of damage that was a huge surprise. So on the second hit, he hit Moray's chassis hard and he ended up cutting through. Shockingly, he tore into the battery, but it didn't catch fire. It was split open really badly, but somehow it just didn't burn. I immediately went over to the RABID officers and showed them the battery, and they helped me dispose of it out in the sand bucket. All of the RABID event organizers and officers were extremely helpful and nice, and they were all competing with their own plastic ants during the event too. I didn't have time to take a picture of the damage done to the battery because I didn't want it to catch on fire at some point, so that's why I don't have any images. I noticed my weapon was at more of an angle after the fight, and I wasn't sure why, but it wasn't that bad, and I decided to keep the same upright for the next fight. After the event, I realized that the hit that breached the chassis actually got through to the aluminum upright and ended up bending it. I was able to repair fairly quickly, and I had only lost 2 motors, a wheel, a hub, and a battery, and I had spares of everything, so it wasn't too bad. I gave Nick the motor he bent as well as a wheel. RABID uses a double elimination tournament format where you have to lose twice to be out, so Moray was now in the loser's bracket. I would fight the loser of the next fight, which was Air Raider versus Wicked Slasher. I was hoping to fight Air Raider because Wicked Slasher was another horizontal spinner, and I had a fork configuration that I could use against a vertical spinner like Air Raider. Wicked Slasher lost. So I would be fighting Wicked Slasher. Wicked Slasher is a scalar kit from Repeat Robotics, and it looks like they're very effective because the top 2 ant weights in the RobotCombatEvents.com ranking are these scalar kits right now. I didn't want to fight another horizontal spinner, but I actually did find some weight this time to run a wedge. The day before the event, I remembered I had some excess aluminum sheet metal, so I cut out and painted a top plate which was almost half the weight of my TPU top plate. Moray runs off an 11.1 volt LiPo battery, but I also had a smaller 7.4 volt battery which is much lighter. The new top plate and the smaller battery gave me enough weight to run a wedge to cover the side that my battery was on. This should protect my battery and help deflect hits. And I printed my wedge out of PLA plastic because it's free if I have it printed at the library. And finally, the person running Blackout gave me googly eyes to put on the robot. When the fight starts, I didn't go for a box rush because I wanted to be extra careful after the last fight, but looking back at it, I should have box rushed him because he didn't spin up right away and points the back of the robot at Moray. I eventually get around to the side and Moray gets its first ever hit and the first hit of the fight. So Moray gets under Wicked Slasher after that, and we go weapon to weapon, and his horizontal spinning bar ends up flipping Moray. Then he immediately gets a hit on my wheel. At this point, I was very worried because Moray can't self-right, and I have no way to defend myself against a spinner when I'm upside down like this. So I tried to drive into the wall to possibly flip my bot back over. When upside down, Moray's spinner drags the floor, but if I can drive up on the wall, I could spin my weapon up and maybe flip myself back over when it ends up hitting the floor. But unfortunately, the disc ended up just cutting into the wood floor. But I thought there was a chance that I could climb up on top of Wicked Slasher, spin up the disc, and then end up landing a hit on top that could flip me back over. So I tried to do that for a lot of the fight. Wicked Slasher tears up my wheels a little more, but they still spin just fine. Fortunately for me, Wicked Slasher was either having some drive issues or the driver was still getting used to driving it because he struggled to line up a lot of good hits. I keep trying to run into him and flip my robot over, but at this point my upright started to take hits, and I'll talk about it more after the fight, but I'm very pleased with how it held up. Wicked Slasher lands a hit that ends up breaking my left side drive motor. After some smaller hits, Wicked Slasher gets a good hit that finally flips Moray back upright. I still had a chance at this point, even with my left side drive down. Now I could use my wedge and my weapon. Wicked Slasher lands some hits and Moray is able to take them pretty well. The wedge did its job protecting the battery. Moray gets a little hit in, but it doesn't do much. It was a very weak hit, either because the weapon didn't get enough engagement or because of battery problems that I'll get into later. My opponent carves a deep gouge into the wedge, and then more importantly, rips off the ablative googly eye armor. I never found where those eyes went. Wicked Slasher circles Moray and lands a perfect hit to the one good drive side, which flips me over and seems to lock up that motor as well. He goes in for one more hit, which flips Moray back upright, but both motors are dead now. I can't move and the countout ends with only 5 seconds left until a judge's decision. Well, Moray was now out of the competition, but that fight was certainly better than the last one. Moray landed 2 hits and survived for almost the entire fight. The damage looks worse than it actually is because the only things that couldn't be used again were the drive motors. The rest of the damaged parts could still be used if necessary. So again, the Fingertech Silver Spark motors failed after only 1 direct hit. After this fight, I decided I'm done with those. The wheels were chewed up, but both are still perfectly capable of spinning and being used in a pinch. The chassis took some direct hits this time, but unlike the first fight, none of the hits broke through. The blade took one or two small hits and only had some minor chips in it. And then the top plate got scratched and it did bend in one spot, but I brought a hand seamer so I easily bent that back into place. The wedge had a huge slash in the front from where Wicked Slasher carved through the PLA, and I gave this part to the builder. The wedge did its job of protecting the battery though. Finally, the upright was damaged. It might look bad, but it actually worked perfectly. So Wicked Slasher hit this area of the robot a bunch of times, and the weapon motor is right there. The aluminum upright protected the weapon motor by sticking out to take the hits before my opponent could actually hit the very important weapon motor. This was the idea behind having the Moray eel head as part of my upright, and it also just looks cool. Even though the upright was damaged, it still worked just as well as it did at the beginning of the fight. It held the motor on, and the weapon still spun even when the drive didn't work. Moray may have been knocked out of the tournament, but I still had another chance to fight, because later in the event, when there are just a few robots left in the tournament, there's more time between matches, so robots can have grudge matches. This means that robots who are eliminated can fight each other for fun, and the result doesn't affect anything. Since I only got 2 fights, and I fought the same type of robot both times, I definitely wanted to fight again. The robot was repaired, and it was time to find an opponent who wanted to fight. I thought I could fight one of the Viper kits because they're less destructive and I would have more of an even fight. They left early. Most of the full combat ants left soon after they were eliminated, so I was limited to Goal Line, who I already fought, or whoever lost the next match between Air Raider and Hellish Rebuke. Or Peanut, but I do not want to fight Peanut. Hellish Rebuke lost and I asked if he wanted a grudge match. He agreed, so Moray, the 0-2 rookie, would be fighting the former champion. Hellish Rebuke is a really cool 4-wheel drive vertical spinner. It doesn't rely on forks or anything, just a spinner in the front and driving skill. It's extremely fast, and I just watched it get smashed by Air Raider for 3 minutes, so it's durable too. And it has butt cheeks. For this one, I actually found weight for my big disc. I wanted to use this, so I'm glad I got the chance. I used the aluminum top plate and the small battery for this to end up making weight. The fight begins with me coming after Hellish Rebuke while he circles me. I felt like Moray was slower than usual, and I realized that it was probably the smaller battery that I was using because I'm used to testing it with the 11.1 volt LiPo, and the one I was using here is pretty old. I drive over to Hellish Rebuke in the corner and he gets under me, but I somehow managed to win a weapon-on-weapon exchange. This is Moray's best hit yet, and it flips Hellish Rebuke, who then tries to self-right against the wall. I go in for more hits, and the disc starts grinding against Hellish Rebuke's wheel guard and the top plate, and I just barely miss the booty. One more hit flips him back upright, and this was a perfect start to this fight. Hellish Rebuke then gets some space and throws Moray all the way across the arena, where it carves a hole into the floor and then does the thing against the wall. At this point, I was stuck, but it was a grudge match, so the results don't actually count towards anything, meaning that he tried to free Moray after I asked him to hit it. This version of Moray struggles to drive inverted with the disc on, so Hellish Rebuke helps me self-right. Violently. I spin around Ripperoni style for a bit and then bounce across the box on my disc. 2 hits, including an awesome weapon-to-weapon shot while I was in midair, flip Moray back upright, but of course, one of the hits broke the right side drive motor. Then Hellish Rebuke delivers a hit so hard it does a flip. Despite operating on only one wheel, Moray drives surprisingly well. Then my favorite moment of the fight happens when I avoid Hellish Rebuke's attack and then swing around to deliver a hit that puts my opponent on his head. Hellish Rebuke has a tough time trying to self-right, and Moray lands another hit when Hellish Rebuke was struggling with gyroscopic forces. Hellish Rebuke eventually finds an opening and pops himself up using his upside-down spinner, but Moray's disc catches his side armor and throws him across the arena, bouncing on his weapon. This is probably Moray's best hit. Another hit pops him straight up. Hellish Rebuke then lands a precise shot directly to the left wheel, of course locking up the motor. Since he was upside down, his spinner was spinning downward, which caused this hit to flip him back upright. Moray was now completely unable to move with about a minute left, but it was a grudge match, and I'm retiring this version of Moray anyway, so I wanted Hellish Rebuke to keep hitting me. One hit flips Hellish Rebuke, so we were both upside down for the rest of the fight. For some reason I wasn't counted out, so there was about a minute of Hellish Rebuke grinding plastic bits off the back of Moray. This technically went the full 3 minutes, but it was a grudge match that wasn't judged. But it did seem pretty obvious that Hellish Rebuke ended up winning. Also, one of the hits knocked Moray's switch into the robot, so a RABID officer and I had to figure out how to turn it off. But we ended up finding that the top plate was so bent that you could reach the battery's connector, so I just unplugged the battery. That fight actually went really well. I got a bunch of hits in and the chassis held up amazingly well. The top plate was wrecked, and I could have bent it back, but I'll make a new one for the next event, so I just signed it and gave it to the builder. Besides the top plate, this was the least amount of damage Moray ended up taking. Both drive motors bent and broke like the other fights, but everything else is fine. The wheels and hubs are slightly torn, but they work just fine. The front of the chassis took only some cosmetic damage, even though it did take 2 huge hits. The back had some places that were ripped up, but nothing that would really affect a fight. The upright and disc also took glancing blows, and only had some slight chips and scratches in them. And then the switch fell into the robot. Before I end the video, I did get a few robot parts to bring home. This is a section of Deatharang, the plastic ant. There was a whole bin of free robot parts for people to take, and there were a ton of these in there, so I think I'm actually going to use it as a tray to put screws in. The people that ran Destructo Shredder were next to me in the pits, and they saw the Fingertech Silver Spark Graveyard, so they told me about the Repeat Robotics brushless motors. They use these in their robot, and they gave me this broken one so that I could find it on the website if I wanted to use it. The Wicked Slasher builder also told me about Repeat Robotics brushed motors, and I'm gonna use those for the next version of Moray. And then finally, after I gave Hellish Rebuke my top plate, he gave me this wedge plate that I did a little bit of damage to. It's such an iconic part on that robot, and I love that I have this now. He also gave me this Team Pit Fiends poker chip, which is cool because I have a few combat robot poker chips already. So overall, the event went pretty well. I might not have won a fight, but Moray functioned until it took a good hit to the drive motors. And most importantly, I learned a lot about what works and what doesn't. So I already have plans for the next version of Moray, which includes Repeat Robotics motors and finding weight for the larger battery. And besides the drive motors, everything else worked very well. One of my biggest concerns was that the weapon motor would break, but the weapon actually never stopped working the whole time. The event itself was also great, and I had a lot of fun competing at it and watching the different fights. Moray will definitely be back at RABID or Macro or whatever event I can make it to next.